Hi, my shifters. Thanks for being here with me. We're going to cross the ocean again from Romania to the United States of America to meet Laura Bergels. She's a communication and marketing expert, and she's the only one in the world with this name. You can look her up. She is one of the most popular communication trainers on the LinkedIn network. I myself took some of her classes and I love the way she talks and teaches. Wonder why? Well, she has over 14 years of experience as a professional speaker and community builder. Laura helps growing businesses improve their messages through public speaking, presentations, websites, blogs, social media. She's worked with business professionals to coach them in their communication skills, especially in moving beyond PowerPoint. And Laura is an adjunct instructor at the Seidman College of Business at Grand Valley State University and is a graduate of Michigan State University with a BA degree in telecommunication and sociology. She writes, coaches, teaches, and speaks from her home office in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and she has an amazing view. I'll show it later when you will understand why this is important. Laura, thanks for accepting my invitation.
This is wonderful. Thank you very much for having me.
I know you like stories, and I like them too. And when I take an interview, I like to know more about the speaker, more than the CV. So Laura, what's your story? How did you discover that you are good at public speaking and teaching others how to do that?
When I first started my career, I had no idea that this was a skill that was valuable or that people even wanted. I was, of all things, a database manager. A database manager? So how did I end up with this? I had in college very much enjoyed theater classes and debate classes and forensic speaking classes, but then I got practical. The computer age was coming up. I'm going to be a database manager, and that's what I was. And while I was at that corporation, I developed a pretty good reputation for being the kind of person who could tell stories using the data. And my presentations got noticed by upper management. And one day, the president of the company called me into his office and he said, Laura, I just had an executive briefing. It was me, the CEOs, a lot of different people who are high level in this. And we asked our top engineer to come give us a status report on our latest project. And what he did is he rolled into the conference room. He had a rolled up piece of butcher paper under his arm, like you would get at a butcher shop. And he rolls it out on the table. He says, and there are scribbles all over it. And he said, you asked me to give an update. So over the past week, I scribbled down every random idea I had about the project. And he taped it down. He goes, there you go. And he leaves. So the president of the company said, I think the engineering team could learn how to do presentations much better than that, and you have this good reputation. Would you work with them on delivering an appropriate executive update? So that was really my first foray into it. It was off from my regular job, but then the call for it kept coming and coming, and I realized that this is valuable, isn't it? That maybe people don't know how to communicate product updates or project updates or a lot of different things. So I started getting more and more involved with that. But I got into it by accident, quite frankly. I thought I was going to be a database manager, but then I shifted and I pivoted. And that's my origin story, so to speak.
When you are just a little girl, were you chatty girl?
I can show you pictures. It is very funny. I was a chatty girl. However, it was my body language and pictures. They haven't changed much from when I'm 2 years old to right now. So what you see is what you get. This is pretty much a 2-year-old doing the same thing as a 60-year-old.
Okay, so you are rather an extrovert than an introvert?
Well, here's an interesting thing. I really don't believe in the introvert-extrovert continuum. I think people often will use their status as an introvert. They identify as introverts, and they may use that as an excuse to not be as good at public speaking as they could be. And there are people who identify as extroverts, and that can hamper them as well because they think, you know, I'm good with people. I don't need to rehearse. I can just wing this thing. So I do believe that there are people who identify strongly as introverts, and I believe that there are people who identify as extroverts. It might be more helpful to identify with your audience and what they need from you while being authentic to yourself.
But if I insist on saying to myself that I'm an introvert, I don't like talking to people, is there any easy way to be good, compelling at public speaking, even if you don't like talking to people?
Here's the thing. While I don't identify as an extrovert or an introvert, people have identified me as an extrovert. You like talking to people. You identify as an introvert and you say you don't like talking to people. And yet you reached out to me and I've seen your interviews and they're very good. They're excellent. You connect with people. So you're telling me this and you're saying, I don't like talking to you though, Laura. I deep down, I think you enjoy talking to people, maybe a little bit, right?
Of course, of course.
Okay.
Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
Correct. So let's look to you as somebody who identifies as an introvert, and I would do this with my own students too, to say, what makes you so far overcome that tendency that you have to be hesitant to talk to people? What are some of the techniques that you have used that have helped you?
I like asking questions. I like shifting from a monologue to a dialogue. That helps me very much.
That is a really typical answer, and it actually does a bit more about how you view yourself and how you frame yourself. A lot of people find a lot of comfort in asking the questions or being the interviewer or the interrogator. They're sometimes called the interrogator. There is a point, though, that you have to respond to that question. You can ask the questions, but it's really not fair to simply ask the questions. Let that be in a situation where people will ask you questions and then you have to answer as well. So it's a bit of a fair play there. Getting to understand yourself and knowing what it is that hangs you up and what's helped you in the past, find that strength that you have and grow on it. Your strength is asking questions. Continue doing that, and you'll find that naturally you'll start responding to the questions more elegantly as well.
Many people would say that, or are afraid speaking in public because they think they might get it wrong. They might look stupid. Maybe they are not the right person to talk about that subject. So how can we get rid of the self-doubt as a speaker? How can we overcome the imposter syndrome? I think this is all about, right?
Oh gosh, I love this question because people do ask me about it all the time because I have a very unique saying about the imposter syndrome. First of all, I suffer from imposter syndrome as well. Will I make mistakes? Yes. How come? Oh, I think it's endemic to my character. I love my imposter syndrome, though. I never want to overcome it. I want to keep it.
Why?
You see, there you go. Why? You're a great interviewer because you know the right question to ask. I gave you a hook and you gave me the why on it. The why part is because being an imposter inspires me to research and learn and practice and know as much about my topic as I possibly can. Think about how that really beats the alternative of someone who says, you know what? I already know everything there is to know. I never make mistakes. I never feel foolish. We don't connect with people like that very well, do we? But if you are inspired to make the best presentation you can and to overcome that hump that you have, you're researching. And then what I've also discovered in researching imposter syndrome is some of the best people in the world have imposter syndrome. Tom Hanks, one of the best actors here in America, has imposter syndrome. He uses it to fuel his performance. Maya Angelou, one of the most gifted poets the world has ever seen, suffered from imposter syndrome, but she used it to propel her work forward. I find that amazingly inspirational. So I do not want to lose that. I want to use my imposter syndrome to really help me do the best that I can to be vulnerable and to connect with my audiences.
So this fear can actually make us better.
Yes. Just remind yourself, some of the best people in the world have imposter syndrome, and it fuels them. Let it fuel you.
That's great. And I think it's motivation for everybody that is watching us. Laura, let's say I have a big business and I want to talk about it at a conference, maybe give an interview, a TV interview. How can I develop the skills I need to prepare to deliver a speech or a presentation? Where do I start?
Yeah, I always love starting with an outline so that you don't talk about too much, you don't talk about too little. You have a nice, solid outline. And there are several different kinds of outlines that people can use for different purposes. So know what it is that you're going to talk about, know your audience, do some audience research, prepare that outline, and then speak to that outline. As you speak to this outline, this is called practice and rehearsal. And that is really the key. I know so many students and so many clients say, listen, I've developed my PowerPoint presentation. I've written out my words. I know exactly what I'm going to say. And I said, did you actually say it? Did you practice it? Did you go through the whole thing? No, it's in my head. I've got this. But here's the problem with that. Your mouth needs help. It needs to practice so that your brain and mouth are collaborating and working together. You will discover mistakes or bobbles in the way you have presenting things. So going through it at least a few times, I like 3 times, to make sure that it's making sense, that what looked good on paper or in your head is actually flowing, that your words are clear, that they're well understood. The practice piece is essential. And then there's one final part, the feedback. Getting really good feedback from people who are specific with their feedback and helpful with their feedback. And as a coach, that's a lot of what I do. I have my clients rehearse, drill, practice, and then they get feedback from me. It's really the 1-2 approach of practice and feedback. It works for just about anything, whether it's public speaking, getting better at a sport, or whatever it is that you want to do.
So we have to say the presentation or the speech out loud.
Yes, you do. My students don't like it, but they have to do it.
How do you rehearse? What's your method? Do you walk around the room, or how do you do it?
I do try to make my presentation as close to the real thing as possible. For example, I will wear the shoes that I'm going to be wearing in that presentation. It's a real subtle tip.
You are going to be comfortable.
Right, you have to make sure that you're suddenly in this position. What shoes am I wearing? How is that going to make me stand? and I will actually deliver it, if I can, to a person. If I don't have a person, I may just use a stuffed animal so that I'm talking to what looks like a group of people, and I'll rehearse it that way. For a lot of these virtual presentations that I do, I have the wonderful opportunity to have a camera and a microphone. I'm recording it, and that way I can review myself and my performance. So that is a real typical way of doing it. I like to get it as close to the real thing as I possibly can. I don't wander around typically when I do something, unless I have to do a short speech where the words are very important and I have to have the word flow right. In that case, people see me walking around the neighborhood and in the parks, and I will be recording and practicing on my phone to get the words just right as I walk. And then I'll listen to it and say, oh, I can change that. I can make this better. So I'm really quite glad that we have cell phones to record with, because I think 30 or 40 years ago, if I had done that, people might think that there was something wrong with me walking around and talking. But the phone really covers up a lot of sins and makes you look way more normal as you do that sort of rehearsal.
So, because we have phones, do you recommend practice in front of the mirror?
No. That's a real short answer, because if you have a phone, why practice in front of a mirror? The phone gives you information that a mirror can't. We're very accustomed to looking into a mirror to basically, oh, how is my hair? Is this looking okay? That's what we use a mirror for. So we aren't seeing ourselves the way other people see us. The camera or the Zoom meeting lets you look at yourself as other people see you, so that you can review yourself and say, what was I doing with my hand there? That was a really weird thing. I shouldn't have been doing that. So you're able to see things on the video that you would never be able to see in a mirror.
Because the mirror doesn't have a rec option.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So can you give us some practical insights? How can we open a compelling speech? A story, a quotes, or what do you recommend?
I recommend playing with your openings. One of the things that I suggest, and you mentioned two great ones, starting with a quote or starting with a strong opening statement, like a story or an anecdote. There are open-ended questions. That's a third way to open up a speech. Having a really surprising fact. And opening with a fact can be a little challenging, because you've got to make sure that that fact is surprising enough to make people say, whoa, I didn't expect that. So if you start out with a mundane fact, like, water is blue, it's really not going to attract the audience as much as you saying something that's really outrageous. That said, now that you've known 4 different things that you can try, the anecdote or the story, the strong opening statement where you say something really bold, or a surprising fact or a quote, this is what I'd like you to try. Try writing 2 of those opening approaches, at least 2, using the different approaches, and then try each one out to see which one is better, which one resonates better. So you may be surprised. You may have this idea of, this is how I'm going to start my speech. But when you do 2 different ones, it gives you a little flexibility to say, you know what? I thought that was going to be the better one. This is the one. And the thing is, you don't know until you write it and say it out loud. I'm going to say over 50% of the time, I am really surprised and go with my second choice almost all of the time. You may be different. You may write the first one out and be awesome, but going through that mental exercise is really helpful.
I also change it, and I find I'm more inspired after saying it out loud. That's a great technique. I recommend it also. So can you give us some tricks for delivering the speech? This is the hard part, or the hardest part.
Yeah, I see you're doing it right now. You're sitting up straight. You're looking straight into the camera, because that eye contact is really important. One of the best things that I like to see my students do when they step on stage is not begin speaking right away. Take that moment. take that beat, look at the audience, smile, get that energy going. It's an amazing feeling. It gives you a rush. It calms you down. It calms you down and gives you a rush at the same time, and then you're off and running. So that is the body language approach. And even on camera, you can do this really well. Make sure your framing is where it needs to be, and that way you aren't worried about how you look or how you sound. You've tested your mic, you're on stage, you're looking in the camera, you're ready to go.
And how do we close the speech? Is this important? Or we can say, that's all, folks, see you.
I have strong opinions on this too. I like closing with the bang. I always think of that grand finale of a fireworks. It's really impressive. You've got to have your strong closing statement as well. And you could use a lot of the same techniques you did for an opening. You can do a summary of what you, for example, if your speech had 3 main points, you can close with your 3 main points really quickly, just a few sentences. You can close with the quote, like you mentioned before. You can close with a story. I had a sales manager who had a personal brand, and he would say that at the close of every meeting. And he was a sales manager, and after every meeting, he would always say, sell value, a 2-word close. And at the time, I thought, I'm getting tired of hearing sell value all the time. But here it is, decades later, and I still remember that. And it's a great message for salespeople too, sell value. So sometimes closing with that personal tagline can be really a great thing to have somebody stick in somebody's head.
Something like this, I think Steve Jobs did it. At the end of each speech, he said, and one more thing.
Yeah.
Before ending his speech, and every presentation he had, at the end of the speech, he said, when everybody thought it was over, and one more thing.
I really, really like that, because in Steve Jobs' case, everyone was looking forward to it. You would feel cheated if he did a presentation and didn't say that. You really would. And Columbo used that too. He is a detective, a television detective. He would interrogate witnesses, he would leave, and then he goes, oh, one more question, one more thing. And as an interviewer, and you're an interviewer too, you know that that's an old trick, and it works really well. Sometimes the best quotes I get are when I do that with an interview subject.
I write many presentations for companies, and I like to craft them especially for each client, to adapt the content and the needs for each of my clients. But I don't always feel inspired. Sometimes I get stuck on a project. I feel like I can't find the right story, the right approach. And while I was doing the research for this interview, I found on your YouTube page a clip where you spoke about that blank in the mind we have. You stood up from your office, opened the door, and there you are in front of an amazing view with a beautiful lake in front of you and green grass. And you said, I quote, if you get stuck on a project, don't grind on it. Walk away from it. You'll come back with a fresh perspective. Walking is a huge part of my creative process. End of quoting. And I will show the footage here so that our viewers can see it too. And now comes the question. Not all of us have this amazing view. If I go outside right now, I'll only see buildings, lots of cars, heavy noises, no trees or green grass. So where can we take our inspiration from?
If I turned the camera around and showed you exactly what I was experiencing in that video, today is a different story. Today is winter. It is very cold. It is frigid. The trees are bare. The ground is white. It's frozen. Everything is gray and black. And yet I continue to walk because I know of no problem so great that I can't walk my way through it. That is my process. That works for me. It generally hits me around 2 or 3 in the afternoon. That's when I go into a lull of creativity. The walk refreshes me so that I come back to it. I also appreciate that I enjoy changing seasons, and actually seeing all this gray gives me hope that sometime the change will happen and it will be beautiful once again. I keep that in my mind. I also live something of a contemplative lifestyle. So a lot of what I do is mental, and I'm very happy to have a meditation and mindfulness practice. So in those moments of creative lulls, I won't grind on it. If I can't take a walk or be in my beloved nature, I will instead sit with my thoughts and look at them. And that is part of my mindfulness process. So that's 2 little tricks that I have is walking and then the mindfulness and meditation practice. It really helps me find my creative center.
Does that make you productive also?
I like to think so. It always seems that when I come back after a walk, I have renewed energy. Or a lot of times while I'm walking, I'm like, oh, yes. Oh, that was it. And then I turn around and go back to what I was stuck on previously.
How about the procrastination? Do you procrastinate?
Oh, every day. As much as I can procrastinate with the best of them. I would like
What?
it's part of the process. I
Okay.
have I have a very weird relationship with procrastination. I will sometimes procrastinate a project that might be due at 5 o'clock today, right? It's due at 5. I should be working on that project right now. And then I'll have another project that's due the day after. I will work on the project that's the day after. So I will procrastinate an immediate project by working on a project that isn't immediate, which goes to show you how weird we can be with our procrastination. And every time I try doing that, I'm like, look how you're procrastinating. this this isn't you probably would be better served by doing the one that's more urgent than the one that's less urgent. So it is a continuing struggle for me, but that's where the meditation comes in handy too, because I will actually look at that and say, look at what you are doing. Do the thing that needs to be done first. And I do struggle with that, and it's a continual work in progress.
So you don't have a cure.
I don't have a cure for procrastination. I have what works. It gets done, and I know that procrastination can help fuel a project. For example, I've got a pretty big deadline coming up in 2 weeks, and sometimes that procrastination gives me a little steam and a little stew time. That little thing where I'm going, I know it's due, but let me think about it a little bit more. And then when I sit down in the clutch, it's like I have the steam to power myself forward. I never let it get too close to the final deadline, but that is one thing that I will sometimes let it go a little bit longer so that I have that creative steam to power through that thing that I've been procrastinating.
That's interesting. I do it myself also. And as you said, I think everybody does it.
Right. Do you feel that little head of steam of, I've been thinking about this a lot, but now, my fingers need to get to work, my mouth needs to get to work, I need to really get my head in the game. That having that little background of thinking through it seems to propel my work forward.
I want to come back a little bit about on stories. Because I think this is the point that starts everything. So many times I hear the reply, I'm a CEO. I don't tell stories. I talk numbers. Or I'm a doctor. I talk medicine. I'm a lawyer. I talk laws and so on. So why are stories so important, even for people that have a very technical domain profession?
Yeah, stories are important because they are more persuasive and more memorable than any data you can possibly give them. And I'm glad that you mentioned doctors, because I have a story about that. See, all of a sudden I said I have a story about that. And now you're like, do tell, right? You want to hear it. What's the story? Well, let's call her Dr. R, because she's a client. And she is a oral surgeon for the mouth. And she got inherited in a practice. And what she does, and all dentists in America are required to do this, is before you have any treatment, you have to take someone's blood pressure to make sure that their blood pressure is not too high and that they can endure the treatment well. And it was a woman who said, I can't believe this. The old doctor never took my blood pressure. How dare you? And she was really offended about it. And she said she noticed that a lot of the older clients were coming in and they were really upset about it. So what a lot of doctors might do is put out a fact sheet that said, here are the reasons, medical reasons why 33%, and they show a fact sheet. Is that really persuasive though? So what Dr. R did instead is she said, you know, I understand I had a patient who was just like you. She was sitting in the chair and she was really upset that I had to take her blood pressure. But she let me do it, and her blood pressure was much too high for me to work on her. So I called her doctor. Together we did that, and the doctor said, get her to the hospital right away, right now. She goes to the hospital and she immediately had surgery. She was on the verge of having a massive heart attack that would have killed her. So she tells that story, and then she just leaves it there and looks at the patient. And the patient says, okay, take my blood pressure. So look what happened in that story. The doctor could have just given somebody a fact sheet and said, you know, read the fact sheet and then you'll understand why. But instead, she engaged this woman in a story. She tells that story. And it makes way more of an impact. Not only does she get compliance and people saying, you know what, Dr. R is a caring person. She's doing this because she's caring. And she told a story, so that makes me like her more. Think about it yourself. Would you like a doctor that just said, yeah, read this, as opposed to somebody who took maybe 30 seconds out to explain why and connect with you? Dr. R's a real smart business person on top of being a doctor, isn't she? Because she's getting people to like her enough to come back and trust her over and over again. So the power of that story, you know, it takes a little extra time to do it, but it makes such a big impact.
I'm not a storyteller, many can say. What should they do to deliver convincing stories?
I do love a book, and it's by Kendra Hall, and it's about stories. And she has this wonderful, very simple formula where she says, you know what a story is? Something happens, boom, explosion, new reality. So those are really the three key parts of a story, where first you're setting things up. You're saying, you know, today is February 21st, 2024. We're in this meeting when suddenly, boom, something happened that changed everything. And you describe what that is. That second part of the story is, well, that's the part of the arc where we started out, here's our normal, boom, something happens. And now what did we do as a result of that thing happening? That's your story. So follow that basic format of whatever it might happen to be. And that story pretty much followed it what Dr. R did, didn't it? She said, we had a normal expectation of nobody's taking my blood pressure. Boom, somebody is giving me trouble or giving me grief about taking their blood pressure. And then her normal was, you know what? Storytelling is what changed everything and got more people compliant and got more people coming back.
You're a marketing expert. How does stories sell, and how can we use stories to sell our products, services, ideas? Even today, when social media is everywhere.
I do recommend telling your stories. One of the first things that I do recommend with customers that I work with is to start story banks. Start collecting stories and sharing stories. Start your meetings with stories. I would start Zoom presentations in classrooms with, we're meeting like 10 minutes before the class starts to say, hey, who's got a story, anything that happened, to find out what's happening in different people's worlds, to find out what customers are saying. All of that is valuable information that people can remember and repeat. They aren't going to remember so much the actual details of every story, but the general things and the general concepts that they need are going to be pretty much right there for them. So first of all, start telling stories, start collecting those stories, start sharing those stories. You can do things like you used to have the Employee of the Month award, have an Employee Story of the Month award. Who told the best story? What was that story? People eat this up. Another thing that I found that's great about storytelling is in this dawning age of AI, or artificial intelligence, I noticed that the writing that it puts out is not very rich in personal stories, because how can it be? And that's where you can shine. This is a beautiful time in history to figure out what is it that makes you uniquely human, what sets you apart from the machine. And the story is what will do it for you. No one can tell your personal story like you can.
Let's say I'm a small business owner. What can I do if I don't have enough money to invest in marketing? We all know that marketing specialists cost a lot of money, and beside that, we have to pay professional social media, photo books, SEO for our websites, and so on. So lots of money to invest from the beginning when your income is pretty low.
And that's why storytelling and public speaking becomes so critical, because this is something that you can do. You can look for those stories, you can collect those stories, you can speak those stories. You have opportunities with things like blogging, with things like TikTok and Facebook, to be able to tell those stories, and to tell stories in a way that engage the audience. For example, if you're telling a story about your customers, you tell the story about how your customer is a hero, what problem that customer had. This was their normal, and then boom, this solution that you had that you put into place, and now what is the customer's new normal of how they're operating with the solution that you have. So start collecting your customer success stories, collect your employee success stories, and those are really fairly simple things for you to do. You can look online for them. You can ask your customers for them. I have one client that I typically send out an email to people who recently purchased the product to say, what made you buy this product? What are you doing with it? And tell me that story. The reason I do that is because it frames it in a story. It's like, what made you buy this product? That is a lead-in for them to tell the story of them. Because if you ask somebody for a review, they might say, it's great, or it's nice, boy, that tasted good, whatever. But you could say, oh, you know what made me try this restaurant? I was driving past and it looked really interesting, and then I went in, and now you've got a story. All right? Because anybody can say, great, 5 stars, it's terrific, but only you can tell the story of what happened to you as a result of buying that product and what made you do it. So those are the kind of details that people lean in and are very interested in.
You mentioned about sharing the stories online, and I also saw on your YouTube that you are not afraid of anything. You record yourself and post lots of exercises, even some that may attract funny or maybe mean comments. And I will give you one example, the lion pose exercise. And I'll show it here so our viewers can see it also. It's a useful exercise for a clear voice. I could use it myself right now because I got a cold, as you can hear it. But aren't you afraid of people's reaction? I know many business owners that are afraid of creating content with their own faces because of what others may think or say about them.
I heard a really strange quote yesterday, and I don't know who said it because I just heard just a little glimmer of it as I turned on the radio, and I had to laugh, and it was really funny. He said, if you find yourself on stage and you've made a mistake, make it twice. That way it'll look like it's on purpose. And I really loved it. And I want to go back and listen to that interview because I just howled with laughter at that. Here's the truth, though. You are going to make mistakes. You are going to do things that are weird on stage sometimes or that hit people the wrong way. You will not please everyone that you're going to talk to. That is the given. That is the mindset that you go into this with. And sure, I am going to look really quite ugly when I do some of these exercises. I don't do them on stage. I do them prior to speaking in a place that people don't see the ugly faces and the weird things that I do off stage, but doing those weird exercises help me when I'm on stage. So I'll give you the example. You said the lion pose, and that's an old pose that, gee, I learned this one 30 years ago and I still do it to this day. So I would do this pose behind the scenes or before I go on stage if I have a sore throat. But now I'm in the position of being a coach and people need to know how to do it. Well, guess what you have to do? You have to make the ugly face for them. And this pose works really well, even if you don't have a speech to give. Sometimes you just want your throat to feel better, don't you? If you're just sitting convalescing around your house. So the idea is to stick your tongue out very far and flat. Picture one of those old statues of an Asian lion. You know, you've got the small eyes, the big mouth. So do this. Really ugly, right? Super ugly. And I'm sure that people would look at that and say, I would never do that in front of people. And I think that's really appropriate. Don't do that if you're not a public speaking coach and if you're not showing something to somebody. But pretty much if I need to show that to somebody, this is the best tool I have in my toolbox to do that. Another exercise that I often go through public speaking consults with are for people who work on the computer all day. They're doing this, and then suddenly they have to give up and give a speech, and their face isn't really warmed up. So we do facial warm-up exercises so that they have a more emotional range in their face. And that's one that I call small as a raisin, big as a pumpkin, where you make your face as small as a raisin, all just wrinkled up. And then you make it as big as a pumpkin. Think of one of those jack-o'-lanterns with the big smile and the big eyes. So you go a few times, and suddenly your face is more animated. So you're not doing that on stage, you're doing it beforehand, so that, guess what's happening? I can even feel it right now, even though I've been talking for a while, that my face has more emotional range in it. So they're ugly things. I don't think I've really gotten any negative comments on it because people more or less understand that she's demonstrating something and she has to go ugly to make that happen.
Thanks for sharing the exercises. By the way, you have a great voice. Is it trained or a birth gift?
It is neither. It's something that I work on. You probably fall into this category as well, that English was not the first language of my parents. And to make matters even more difficult, they spoke two different languages. And I live in the United States, where English is the predominant language that is spoken. However, as a child, I was getting confused and speaking all of the languages all at once and not understanding why people weren't understanding me at all. So I did have to get some speech therapy to learn how to speak more clearly and in a way that people could understand what I was saying. Fortunately, that was done when I was younger, but it's also unfortunate because I do get a lot of people calling to say, you know what, I have an accent and I want to talk like you. I want to learn to talk like you. I want to sound like an American. And I do not do that, and I don't recommend it. I think accents are beautiful, And I think they make you unique. It speaks to where you're from. It is a beautiful thing. If somebody has a problem with your accent, that's their problem to work with. It's not your problem to solve. So I will ask clients who ask me about that. I'm like, what is it about my voice that you like? And they said, well, it's very easy to understand. It's very clear. And I said, what if we could do that for you and you get to keep your accent? Wouldn't that be the best of both worlds? So that's something that I'm more inclined to work on with a client than eliminating their accent, because I had to go through accent elimination as well, and I did not care for it. And I don't think that that is a satisfactory way forward for the world.
What technique do you use for training your voice to sound compelling?
I do focus mostly on clarity.
On diction?
Yeah, clarity. I like calling it clarity because I think most people who talk to me have issues with clarity. Diction sometimes goes with word choice, and especially when I'm struggling with learning a new language, my word choices aren't going to be that great because I don't know so many words in different languages. But if I can work on making the words I do know as clear as possible for people. And there are different exercises that we do with different clients. Some clients merely speak too quickly. And that's very common. There are a lot of cultures that believe the more quickly you speak, the more intelligent you will sound.
Really?
That's not necessarily true. Uh, Speaking slowly sometimes gives these people an edge because you can understand what they're saying. There's a little bit of space between each word. And as we speak more to international audiences, that clarity component becomes really important because you want your audience to be able to understand you. So sometimes it's a matter of let's slow down. Let's put some focus on how we are pronouncing our words. That often lets us slow down. So if you're troubled with, you know what, I'm speaking too fast, I'm getting the feedback that I'm speaking too fast, it doesn't work for me to say, well, just slow down then, because you can't. You might be able to do it for a minute or two, but then you'll get caught up and excited about what you're saying and you'll be boop, off and running. But if you focus on the pronunciation of each word, that slows you down automatically. So there are little mind tricks like that that we play in coaching sessions to get people to speak with more clarity.
So how do you practice? Very, very, very slowly? Oh.
No, actually, I do something rather different. I will, like I said, often record, and I will have clients record on video, or if they're doing a radio or a podcast address via audio. And when we rehearse, we do drill questions. We drill the tough questions to make sure that they are prepared to answer those. As a journalist, you probably have faced people who have had media training. And it means that somebody like me comes in and said, okay, let's prepare a list of 10 possible questions that this reporter is likely to ask you. And then we are going to rehearse those things out loud. And then we are going to have feedback on how did that work? What could we say that would be more elegant? What could we say that would be more concise? How are we going to format that so that it's a 1-minute soundbite instead of this rambling dialogue that you just did? So there's a lot of narrowing down to make sure that that comes together with clients.
Do you have anxiety? Do you get nervous today when you have a speech, a presentation?
Of course I do. Of course.
What do you feel?
Let's see. It changes throughout time. And that's one thing that people don't like to hear, but it's sad but true that there are some executives who say, you know what, I never get nervous. I get on, I'm just fine. And then suddenly something strikes them. They're like, what is happening to me? Why am I suddenly shaky? For me, the shaky leg has always been sort of my hallmark. Before I step on when I'm anxious, my legs will be doing like a little happy dance, like, oh man, can my legs stop shaking anytime now? Here's the thing. The more you practice, the more you have that, I'm on stage and I'm doing this activity, the more you realize that, oh, that's my normal. Here's a weird thing. A lot of times people don't even notice that. And it may take me 1 or 2 minutes to get over that shaky leg, right? Now I'm on stage and I'm feeling my legs shake and tremble underneath me. And part of me is thinking, oh my goodness, the entire audience is just looking at me. I'm a nervous wreck. They're looking at me, they're looking at this, they're looking at me speak. And within 1 or 2 minutes, it happens to me every single time, the shakes absolutely go away. They're gone. After the first 2 minutes, I'm sort of like a pony or a horse at the gate. I'm all anxious to start. And then after I start, I'm like, okay, I'm in my stride now and I'm fine. That's me and that's my normal. Knowing that is really important for me not to flip out when my leg starts flipping out on me. So a lot of it is self-awareness and getting to know yourself. I also have different tricks that I like to do beforehand when I'm especially anxious. And what works for me may not work for you. I often call it, you need to mix your own bespoke cocktail of different techniques and tricks that help you. I think Matt Abrams, in his excellent book, I call it a bespoke cocktail. And he says you have to have a toolkit and you have to be prepared to change that toolkit and mix it up, because as you age, what used to work for you may not work for you any longer.
What's your cocktail right now?
My what?
Cocktail.
Oh, my cocktail right now? My bespoke cocktail for anxiety is to do the box breathing, where you breathe in, hold it, and then let it go and repeat. So I do like doing that to really ease some of the anxiety. It eases me down for a few minutes before I hop on stage. Another bespoke cocktail trick that I like that works for me, if I'm feeling just a little lack of confidence before I go on stage, I will find a private area to do some of that power posing. That the power pose is where you might put your hands on your hips and strike a very bold sort of Superwoman or Wonder Woman pose, or, you know, put your hands above your head to stretch, do some big muscle activity. Surprisingly, this calms you down. And see how I'm doing strange things again that, you know, people online might laugh for. But then you step on stage and you realize, oh, I've got more breath in my lungs. I've activated my body. I'm feeling so much more confident. I am ready to go. And once you start doing these activities, you find, where's my anxiety? It's not there anymore. So some of those kind of techniques work very well for me. They may not work for you. Here's one thing that works very well for many people, which is positive self-talk. They do that before they have a speech or a presentation. And I have tried that. And guess what? Doesn't work for me at all. But it does work for some people. And if it does work for you, you do that thing.
I saw your hands. Your gestures are great. So I want to ask you, what can we do with our hands when we speak in public? That's the question that kills the brain.
Yeah. I've actually seen comedy routines where somebody's like, what am I doing with my hands? Suddenly they're over-focused on, what am I doing? What am I doing? In most instances, try not to think about what it is that you're doing with your hands, unless you're doing something very hand specific. There are certain things that I have to do and coach clients out of. For example, I had it's hard to show, but she was like, you know, she was very hunched over and everything. So I had to give her, I want you to start out your presentation. And I'm squeezed in here. I was more broad, but I want you to start out with a broad muscle thing and your hands back. And she was, oh, that's weird. I would never do that. I'm like, I'm going to have you try that. And so she's doing this. She goes, this is just completely weird. And 3 or 4 times she said, this isn't natural. I'm like, exactly. When I'm with my friends telling a story, I'm not doing this. You're on a huge stage, you're doing this. It's letting you be less nervous. You're getting this activity going. People aren't in the audience going, look at her, she's weird, her hands are out. They aren't even thinking that at all. They're thinking that you're talking to them and that you're enthusiastic and excited about them. So unless you've got a specific problem with that somebody has spotted with your hands, try not to think about your hands too much. For example, I helped that woman with her problem of hunching over and everything. There are other things that I've coached people with their hands. For example, if they're on a panel and they have a desk and their hands are on top of each other, this is a really good position to have the hands because you're not tempted to do this and look like you're praying, or if you're very nervous, you start clutching a little bit more, and now you're white knuckling. You see how my knuckles are getting white and I look really tense. Whereas if I do this, it's telling my body, okay, calm down. Also, you look really calm to the audience too. So one hand over the other. The only other times that I advise people about hands is when they are demonstrating something. So if I am showing you something, sometimes I have to do a display that's a little bit more exaggerated than I would do if I was just sitting across from you talking. I might go, hey, look at this thing. But when you're on stage, you might have to do a different presentation.
I want to talk at the end of this podcast about another problem. You're a business communication expert. So what should a company do when facing a crisis communication? Every organization needs to plan how to communicate with employees, customers, suppliers, media, and the public at large. A lack of communication in a situation like this can cost millions of dollars, reputation, and public trust. What do you recommend?
I do recommend having a crisis communication response plan in place. That generally begins with the executive level and spreads out through the organization. It's really important to have because you will face some kind of crisis. And sometimes the CEO of the company is not the best person to talk about it. They may be unavailable. There may be a subject matter expert within the organization that is better served to answer more technical questions that a reporter might have. You may have an assigned spokesperson that needs to be trained. But basically, even if you don't have that crisis happen, I hope it never happens to you, but it will. Going through the process of thinking through how you are going to respond in all these different situations. You're going to ask these questions, you're going to prepare, you're going to train your people on how to speak to the media, you're going to drill difficult questions with the people, and make sure that you are prepared and have that plan in place. Everyone at some point is going to be a public speaker. Make sure that your crisis communication people and spokespeople actually have that kind of training as well.
Many companies lies in a situation like this. Is this okay?
I don't recommend it. You know what? Your lie will be found out, and that will make things much worse. So lying also from it's unethical, but if you still aren't caring about the ethics of it, just know that your lying will make things worse for you in the long run.
Other companies ignore the crisis. Don't say anything. They wait for the crisis to go. Is this a way to do it?
I think a crisis is an opportunity. So if a crisis faces you and you have planned a strong response that resonates well, it is a moment of leadership and opportunity. More people can be drawn to your brand because of the way you respond to it. So look at those crises as an opportunity to communicate with your audiences and stakeholders and shareholders so that you can build a deeper connection with them. It is one more opportunity for you to tell your story. And that's really vital. Don't let a good crisis go to waste. Address it.
Laura, thanks for this great conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I would love to be longer, but we already talked for an hour, so I don't want to keep you any longer. I really enjoyed our conversation. How was it for you?
beautiful. You can tell that you're an interviewer because you ask such great questions that people probably love answering, and then people who are in a difficult situation probably do not love answering so much, but I loved answering all of your questions.
Thank you very much. Laura, where can people find you?
You can connect with me at LinkedIn. I am Laura Bergels. Do a search there for me. When you connect with me, tell me that you found me through Valentina, and that's how I'll connect with you. So be sure to do that. I post all the time there. You will also see my courses there at LinkedIn Learning.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope it was an interesting episode for anyone looking to start a business or wanting to better promote their existing businesses, to step forward, talk about their products, services, ideas, to inspire, attract new customers, sell more, become known in the industry, make their voices heard. Don't hesitate to write us your impressions in the comment section, and we'll answer each one of them. And don't forget to subscribe to the Shift Podcast channel, because more special guests are coming up with valuable knowledge to share. Until next time, Shifters.